Hello. Well, I'm delighted to be here, particularly because it's such a fascinating intersection of subjects and such a fascinating combination of speakers that we're going to hear. There is that great quote from Gandhi that the greatness of a nation and its moral progress are judged by the way its animals are treated. Well, you could substitute the words greatness and progress for survival, and the definition of animals, clearly, as far as this afternoon is concerned, is that animals, it's not humans and animals, it's humans as part of animals. And in line with the ambitions of today, this session is going to seek to shift perspectives, to get a clearer view, maybe to map a way through. And that means sometimes abandoning traditional, often disastrous points of view, ones that have taken us to where we are, for unfamiliar and uncomfortable insights. So the panel that's been assembled, as I say, they're going to put forward in the next hour and a half or so some startling ideas, observations, and experiences indeed. But there's an underpinning of reason and science to all of that. It's an impressive mix of academics, academe, and practice. So you will be hearing from Professor Jenny C. Stevens, Professor of Sustainability Science and Policy at Northeastern University. I'm not going to give lengthy biogs because I know you can all click through on those links you've already got. From W.K. Luna, who hereafter will be referred to as Nell, who is artist and PhD candidate. Robin Maynard, Director of Population Matters, and Dr. Emily Doolittle, composer and lead in art making in the Anthropocene at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. The way it's going to work is this. Everybody will speak for roughly 10 minutes. If there is something that you would like clarified specifically about that presentation, there'll be a couple of minutes after they have spoken just to do that. But we want to keep the momentum going so that actually the real discussion happens after all 4 presentations and can involve everybody. So if you would kind of hold back your big thoughts if possible, but obviously please do feel free to question. I'll be up here to handle that, to question the speakers immediately after they do speak. So let us start. The speaker is Robin Maynard of Population Matters, who for more than 30 years now, I think, has been studying the environment and the effect of humanity upon it. So, Robin.
Thank you, Francine. Thank you. Cool. Follow that if you dare. Follow that I must. Yes, I mean, I was almost close to tears, and that's what should happen when you hear those stories. So we are all animals, but some of us, as we've heard and seen, some of us and some genders and some sectors and some species are more equal or valued than others. And I came in at the end of the session this morning, and apologies for not being there right at the beginning, but I could hear people talking, and as both Jenny and Nell have very powerfully just now, talking about the inequalities, the injustices, the domination of the earth and of other species, and of other peoples, of other groups, other genders, in our own species by what is still largely a patriarchal establishment or power base, or power bases, be those political, corporate, or religious. Sometimes they're working together, sometimes they're working individually, but they always have a common goal. It's, as that question there, shaping or controlling the narrative. So religious establishments in particular, and I rather love the Stabat Mater. I love Pergolese's music, and and I'm not religious, but it does something for me. But what a mawkish, sentimental image it is, and what at odds with reality. There is Christ bleeding on the cross. The restrictions and the controls and the taboos that religious establishments and others impose upon their flocks. Yes, I currently work for Population Matters. It's a charity, and we are concerned with the impacts of ongoing human population growth and overconsumption. And there are many nuances and injustices and disparities and inequalities in that simple sentence. But girls' and women's rights and choice are at the heart of everything we do and our work. And this, my T-shirt, was not designed by us. It was designed by a wonderful group we work with in Kenya, in an informal settlement or slum called Kibera on the edge of Nairobi. It's the biggest informal settlement in Kenya. It's the biggest informal settlement in Africa. And we worked with some young men and women, former gangbangers, muggers, and prostitutes who wanted to turn their lives around. And they now have an environmental group, and they are also promoting women's rights and family planning. And they designed this, and they put it up on the corrugated sheeting on the shacks in that centre. And that's one of the proudest moments when I saw our logo there doing good in that place. But before turning to the really positive things, which was my brief, I promise you, don't talk about negative things, Robin, talk about the positives, talk about solutions. I think we have to talk about some of the negatives. Because, yes, girls and women's rights and choice are absolutely at the heart of our work, and they are solutions, but they're not the reality for hundreds of millions of girls and women and boys and men globally. So this first slide, I don't need to read out all the facts. You've seen it up there. But there are many, many things which should be sorted out, which haven't been sorted out, and we've been talking about it for decades. And I heard some of the panel this morning saying, well, this incremental change, this lack of progress, this talking about the same problems, but not actually changing the system or the dynamic. Now, look at me. What a worthy man I am. I'm wearing my Sustainable Development Goals badge. I bet you've seen a lot of these around, and I bet you've seen them on the lapels of politicians of all nations. And I was at the UN recently, and it was almost the badge of honor. I sort of put it on almost as a joke, because we have not a cat in hell's chance of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 good, generally good things that the United Nations wants to see happen by 2030. That's just 7 years' time. And by the UN's own admission, it's very unlikely any will be achieved in time. So yes, we've got a new initiative, a new Summit of the Future initiative to try and make these, take that progress forward, or rather forget that we've missed the timeline that was set. So particularly on SDG 5, which is gender inequality, on current progress, SDG 5 won't be achieved until 2108. That's another 85 years. That's the UN's latest calculation. 1/3 of all women in low to middle income countries give birth under the age of 19. I have an 18-year-old daughter. That's children giving birth to children. And it's a lot younger than 19, actually, in many cases. 270 million women. These are all the facts, the statistics that I burden my life and others with on a daily basis. 270 million women around the world have an unmet need or lack of choice over safe, modern family planning. And I'm sorry to say this, but looking at those visceral images that Nell put up, which are sort of, and I hope you won't take this as not a compliment, but they're sort of Baconian in their viscerality, in their fleshiness and bloodiness. 80% of girls in Egypt, where I taught as an English teacher for a year and a half, and I taught many of these girls. 80% of the girls there suffer FGM. That is, they have part of their clitoris cut off. I'm really sorry to surface these inconvenient truths. They're grim facts. And yes, the brief was to be positive, so I will come on to the solutions. Because the solutions, the positives, are so simple, so obvious, so cheap, so effective, and they rely on tried and tested and available technology. So it's really hard to understand why they're still out of reach to so many hundreds of millions of girls and women around the world. It's simple. It's 12 years of quality education for all girls and all boys. It's access to choice of contraception so that women have autonomy and agency over their own bodies and their fertility. Simple. And it wouldn't cost a lot of money. $264 billion, well, I know it sounds quite a lot of money, $264 billion would sort out those problems over the next 30 years. That's less than the combined personal fortunes of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. They could resolve that gender inequality, end those barbaric practices like FGM in a positive way, meet global unmet need for contraceptive choice by 2030. Yet what do those aging space cowboys do? They strap themselves into what is pretty hard not to see, as I think somebody mentioned earlier, enormous metal phalluses, and thrust themselves into the lifeless, empty void of space, looking for new worlds. I have a word for them. It's not very polite, but I think they're pricks. So we don't really need new, shiny, expensive, high-tech toys for billionaires. We just need to deliver the tried, tested, and known solutions to those most in need. And perhaps it's better to hear this rather than from a middle-aged old white man than me who's worked for 38 years in the environment movement and clearly not succeeded on my brief. But better to hear it from somebody with the greatest legitimacy. This is Malala, who was shot in the head for having the temerity of wanting to go to school. She knows that education and family planning bring multiple benefits for those individual girls and women, their families and their communities and their countries. But they also bring enormous benefits to the environment. They reduce the impacts on people's local environment, biodiversity and natural resources. And they have a significant impact because of the unplanned pregnancies and the births that were not wanted and were not able to be supported. Because of that, those avoided births, they have a significant impact on climate change. It's not an easy thing to say. Nobody is saying instrumentalize women's bodies to fight climate change. But no one should ignore the benefits of giving people their basic fundamental rights and the further rights that brings to our Mother Earth. In hard facts, this slide is based on a very interesting research project called Project Drawdown. Their only brief was to look at the top available solutions for climate change that could be deployed now, the top 100, about 99 they looked at. And these are the top 5. Number 3 is family planning and education. That would reduce carbon dioxide over the next 30 years by more than all onshore and offshore wind power combined. But despite those goods and those benefits, individually and collectively and planetarily, of deploying those available solutions, we're not doing it. There are 8 billion people, 8 billion souls on this planet and counting, but there are more than half a dozen countries that have pro-natalist policies where childbearing is promoted and access to abortion and family planning is restricted. And this is largely through unfounded fears of economic decline, because as you saw from Kate Rayworth's slide that Jenny put up, old school economics prevails. What do you hear on the news every day? It's all about growth, 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 growth. Growth is what has got us into this bloody mess. Why are we carrying on? Why don't we have a different paradigm? Because it suits people. It suits people in those vested interests that we've heard about. And it's often through not just fears of economic decline, but some pretty nasty nationalism, as you hear in Hungary. The declining population will not be solved by people who desperately need better lives from elsewhere. It'll only be solved by new little Hungarians of the right colour, creed, and race. That is the sort of nationalism we are seeing rising across Europe and also in the United States. And women's bodies are being instrumentalized to produce more consumers, more taxpayers, more pension payers, cheap labor, soldiers, and souls to shore up the capitalist military religious order and their power. And we referred to, and Nell used that absolutely accurate statistic, Nell, in terms of the weight of mammals on the Earth. We call this era, or scientists call this era, the Anthropocene, because we are the dominant species. There are more chickens in Europe than there are wild birds. And Nell, beautifully brought this out through her art and that very, very moving film. But there are very uncomfortable parallels between the restriction of women's rights, the sanitizing and obscuring of their reality, their denial of choice and rights, and that of other species. So in terms of sheer numbers, sheep and cattle and pigs and chickens are incredibly successful. But that's because they're useful to us. They've been selected and bred. They've been altered and engineered for the traits we humans prize. In China, there are units, they call them concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs for short, 25 to 50-story pig units, where pigs are medicated, mutilated, and then slaughtered for our consumption. Now, I would say there are there aren't plenty, but there are humane, compassionate, ethical farming and what I would call good husbandry systems, but they're not the majority. And for the other species that are not useful to us, they're in decline. There's been a 69% average decline in wild animal populations over the past 50 to 60 years. Hence, we are driving the 6th mass extinction of life on Earth. We are going to be, if we're not careful, a very lonely ape on this planet, with the tapestry of life rent and reduced to its, bare bones. Now, I think I've bored you to death with PowerPoints, which I promised not to do, and I've put horrible statistics up, and I can see some people in the audience saying, I wish he hadn't said that, and he didn't need to say that, and I know that statistic. Please shut up and go away. You should never come in. I feel like I was the sort of cheese, the vegan cheese in the sandwich between Jenny and Nell, and I know I'm going to be followed by an excellent presentation. And anybody who is a vegan knows that vegan cheese is no substitute for the real thing. So I'm sorry to be the cheese in the sandwich. But we try to communicate through our form of art. We try as a campaigner. This is our statue Bigfoot, and he is based on a human male. He's looking down in a slight perplexity at his oversized foot, which seems to have squashed a load of biodiversity, and the earth is a bit flattened, and it's oozing oil and squashed biodiversity. And some people might think it's offensive, because he's actually made up of a matrix of little baby blanks welded together. But I've never, when we've taken him out into a public space, found anybody offended by him. Indeed, not this young girl here, but at another event, a young girl lay down beside him and the globe and spent about half an hour talking to all the animals and talking to the earth, her mother earth. It was just so beautiful and instinctive. Our other prop is this fellow, who I sometimes think is a sort of baby Boris Johnson or Donald Trump. Take your pick of bloated, narcissistic, egotistical, etc., fill in your words. And what he's trying to, and he's sort of like, well, what's my problem? His problem is, particularly for us in the global north, our footprint is disproportionate. If we were the true size as human beings on Earth compared to all our fellows, in the UK we would be 10-ton King Kongs. In the US, it'd be 15 tons, stomping about the countryside, gobbling everything we can, nicking everybody else's resources, bringing them in, and living pretty good lives off the fat of the land. The real challenge, and I haven't heard it answered yet, is that none of us want to give up our good life. There was a recent survey done of the UK public talking about what was needed if we are going to achieve climate justice. And it was like, we need to have an income no greater than that of the average Ghanaian, at the very best. But that's like, I don't know, $20,000, $24,000 or something. The majority of people in this country will not give up their lifestyles or their quality of life. We have to communicate a new form of wellness if we are going to enable people to empathize with everybody, not just their immediate family, not just their immediate country, but this one wonderful world we live in. And my final word, before I see if I hate all space exploration, didn't put the image up, I should have done, but the one huge benefit of space was showing us our one blue-green planet hanging there in that void of space like a beautiful blue-green pearl. We finally got this understanding of this one vulnerable living planet in the known universe. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Any questions immediately for Robin? Anyone? Anywhere? If not, I'll be over there.
Without meaning to be make you be too logistical, I'm wondering how funding is made accessible to the people who need it, because you spoke about if Jeff Bezos and whoever actually chose to put their money in the right place, then things could be done. But how does one go about that? Isn't that part of the problem?
Yes, well, there's lots of ways. I mean, we have small programs where we work with grassroots projects. We never jump in. We always work with grassroots partner organisations wherever they are. And by the way, we have partner organisations in the English Midlands where there's a very high incidence of teenage pregnancy because industry was gutted and nothing was put back in its place, so you have social disruption. But governments, UN, trying to promote those programs. A bad example is our own government. We cut our overseas aid under the last administration, and actually we do have a well-informed Minister of State in Andrew Mitchell who understands the issues and actually cares about them, but he hasn't managed to get overseas aid increased to 0.7% of gross national product, let alone 1%. But if we want to see a more equitable world, and this is a really difficult issue, but you see these interesting policies around migration. We haven't seen anything in terms of migration because of what's coming in terms of climate change, which is going to affect, as somebody, I think Jenny said earlier and others have said, the poorest, most vulnerable societies in the world. Where are they going to go? So we should be pouring money into those countries to enable them to be more climate resilient, to be able to prepare themselves for what's coming, and to be able to develop in an appropriate method. What we're doing, we're closing ourselves back. I fear we're going to see right-wing governments all over Europe because of what's to come. So we should be pouring money in, is what I'm saying, and we're not. And I'm sorry, I'm not Jeff Bezos to give my fortune away.
Thank you, that was really great.